This video is a review I'll be doing on the anime The Devil is a Part-Timer. Be warned that this review will contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen the anime yet and you want to, be sure to go watch it first. However, before I start, I'd like to make it clear that this review will only be looking at The Devil is a Part-Timer anime. The original light novel series and the manga won't be taken into account here. I'll just be looking at how well the anime adaptation can stand up on its own. If the light novel or manga address some or all of the issues that I bring up here, that's great, but I feel that a series should be able to work as its own individual story. The Devil is a Part-Timer is a primarily comedic show, but also includes more dramatic fantasy elements as well as some romance. The basic premise is that in another dimension, the equivalent of Satan leads a demon army and is waging war against the humans. He begins losing the war, however, and flees into a portal that transports him to modern-day Japan. With the loss of his powers, Satan is forced to integrate into Japanese society and ultimately ends up getting a part-time job at McDonald's. It's a simple riches to rags story, but with Satan. I think this is a pretty interesting idea for a story, and while it's not exactly the most original idea ever, there's definitely an awful lot of ways this storyline could be taken. When I first started watching, I was excited to see where it was going to go. Sadly, for the most part, The Devil is a Part-Timer uses its interesting premise to create another story about an average guy with amazing powers that women fall in love with because he happens to be the protagonist. That's a bit of a harsh statement outright, so let me preemptively say that overall I find The Devil is a Part-Timer to be a slightly above average anime that begins well but falls off over time. The comedic aspects of the show are very strong, but its attempts at drama just don't go so well.
Hello, this is your Midnight Marauder program.
I'm going to start out with the motivations of the main character, as it's probably the biggest problem I have with the show, and a lot of the other problems I have stem out from this one. Remember how I described Satan as an average guy? Well, that's part of the problem. Satan is your typical anime protagonist. He's a male young adult with scruffy black hair who has a few major defining characteristics. He's not a bad person, he's determined, and he's aloof. He's given these characteristics to come across as a relatable normal guy. This is a very common archetype for protagonists, and it's used because it's a very simple way to make your physically powerful or otherwise unrelatable main character suddenly relatable to the average person. While I think this is a very lazy way out for writers, I don't really have a problem with its use in general. The problem with its use here though is that they've built a lot of the dramatic elements of the show around Satan's change from, well, the equivalent of fucking Satan, into this relatable everyday guy character. But the lack of reason or purpose behind Satan's change makes all the drama in the show come across as very contrived. The show starts off well, characterising Satan by showing him give a speech about planning to take back his realm before fleeing into the portal, showing him crying over his new circumstances to create some sympathy. Then, in one jump cut time skip, Satan's character changes drastically. Not only is Satan now used to his new life as a part-timer, but he's become a stand-up, really nice, hard-working person. For example, he's now nice enough that he's perfectly okay with letting Emmy, a human from his own realm that followed him through the portal with the intent of killing him, stay at his house. I mean, I struggle enough as it is to believe that Satan got used to the whole human thing so quickly, but really, he's this nice? Why did the show bother to spend most of the first episode characterising him as acting like Satan if none of that actually mattered to his character? Every so often the script does seem to remember he's supposed to be Satan, and so pulls out the same joke about Satan planning to take over both the Earth and his realm by rising through the ranks at McDonald's. It's a funny joke, but it's done at the expense of his character. There's no other point where Satan is so blatantly ignorant about how the human world works, so when he explains to other people that he's apparently still Satan because he wants to take over the world through McDonald's, I just don't buy it. I don't even buy he's enough of an idiot to think that would work either. We see him quickly establish what he needs to get in order to live in a completely different world. He's clever enough, so either he's lying about wanting to take over the world and he's a complete Mary Sue from the first episode, or the writers just don't care if his motivations make any sense. There's just no explanation for his change, no character arc or build up. Satan simply changes and the audience is just expected to accept that. And Satan's drastic shift in personality is a pretty hard thing to just accept. This ends up causing a lot of problems for the entire show, not just for our main character. This is mainly because a lot of the show's most dramatic moments come from other characters coming to terms with Satan's change. And with no clear reasoning behind that change, a lot of the drama ends up coming across as pretty shallow. I'll give an example. Satan is at one point confronted by Emmy, who explains how his armies killed her father, and how she was trained from a very young age with the purpose of killing him. Her moral dilemma here is pretty interesting. The person that ruined her life is changed into a morally good guy, and she can't justify killing him just because of his past actions. When she finally breaks down in tears and explains her past to Satan, he responds with this: "I never really thought of it like that. Anyway, sorry, and I didn't really understand people back then." Not only does his casual and uninformative response to such a heartfelt outburst make him seem unsympathetic about his horrendous actions and their consequences, Satan's past isn't even a mystery to the audience. We follow him right from being defeated in his own realm to his first day in Japan, and despite this, the audience has no idea why or when he considered himself to start understanding people. And that's pretty much the entire problem right there. The show cares enough about the drama to include it, certainly, but not enough to actually put much effort into it. Most, but not all of the dramatic scenes are punctuated by regular jokes, so it's clear where the show's priority is, and to be fair, it does the jokes well. Drama and comedy aren't mutually exclusive though, and I don't think that the funny jokes are enough of an excuse for the regularly poor drama. You may have noticed that so far I've only really been talking about two characters, and that's Satan and Emmy. The show actually contains quite the number of other characters, as you may have seen from this very video, but sadly only two of them have anything really resembling a character arc, and that's Emmy and Suzuno. Both of them sadly share the exact same character arc, but I'll get to that in a minute. There's really not that much to say about the other characters, as they all serve as essentially jokes. Again, funny jokes that serve their intended purpose really well, but jokes nonetheless. Ashia is probably the best example of this. He's one of Satan's older generals that followed him through the portal to Japan, and his joke is that he's frugal about their spending money and that he's overly dramatic if he feels he's disappointed Satan. His character isn't really necessary for forwarding anything in the plot. He doesn't change or learn anything over the course of the show, and when he's in a scene he generally just plays out his joke and then that scene ends. Most of the other characters, at least at some point, end up in this position. Chiho has a crush on Satan, Lucifer is a lazy NEET, and Satan works really hard at McDonald's. They don't grow or change as characters, they just play out their pre-subscribed roles and jokes, and after 13 episodes, it begins to wear a bit thin. Emmy and Suzuno are slightly different. There are certainly episodes where they fall into that category of joke character, being the ditzy hero and not understanding modern technology respectively, but they do actually learn something and change, albeit slightly, over the course of the series. They both come to the human world with the intent of killing Satan, find that he's now a good guy, struggle to come to terms with that, and eventually come to the conclusion that yeah, he's a good guy now and killing him probably wouldn't be fair. The slight difference between the two arcs is that Suzuno's takes a lot longer to get there. In Emmy's arc she brandishes a knife at Satan and makes the claim she's watching him constantly, and that's really about as far as that ever goes, as she comes to terms with Satan's change pretty early on. Suzuno, on the other hand, betrays the entire group, gets Emmy kidnapped, and tries to kill Satan under the orders of another angel before she manages to figure it out, and this pretty much serves as the climax of the show. It's a weak arc that they both sadly share, but it does at least give a break from the other repetitive characters towards the end of the series.
I told you that story to tell you this one.
When Suzuno has reached the climax of her arc and finally starts to believe that Satan has truly changed, she comes out with this line: "At the very least, the life the Overlord, no, the life Mao Saro's leading here in Japan, does not oppose the concept of justice." This is perhaps the dumbest line in the entire show. Satan is a character that we know has at least indirectly killed many people. He is not punished for this, and in fact, he has as much freedom as he could ever want. It's not exactly what I would be calling justice. The show has this weird extremism attitude where Satan can only either be killed for his crimes or go completely free. The concept of some sort of middle ground, like Satan going to jail or paying in some other way, is not mentioned. This is actually pretty fucked up when you start to think about it. The show seems to be saying that if a murderer truly changes his ways, he should just be let go for whatever crimes he did in the past, no matter what those crimes were. I don't think the writers are actually saying this, however. I just think they didn't think about it very much. Don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying that I need all morally bad characters to be equivalently punished for their actions in a story, but I do need characters to act in a way that makes sense in that world. And Emi or Suzuno not even considering another form of punishment other than murder makes no sense.
I gotcha!
The average episode of the show does a somewhat decent job of keeping some sort of story going. Each episode tends to be built around, in some way at least, a character trying to kill Satan and those around him. Sometimes it's subtle, only occurring at the end of an episode, and sometimes it's the entire focus. An air of mystery is also generally kept around as characters try to figure out who it is that's trying to kill them, and then, once the character is found out, a big fight occurs where Satan obviously wins because he's the good guy, and then that arc is over. The overarching storyline is by the numbers stuff, and it plays out the exact same arc twice. An unknown character tries to assassinate Satan and his friends, they fail, they're found out, and Satan fights them and he wins. There's not even any real tension that Satan could lose, because he isn't ever shown as losing. Good fighting animes and shows alike tend to show the hero lose a few times before they win to make the fight seem more tense. If the audience knows the hero can lose, there's a lot more reason to be interested in him or her winning. These arcs also don't further any of our characters' established goals, and by the end of both of them, the only thing that's really changed is that 2 new characters are added to the good guy list. It's bland, average stuff, and if you've seen a fighting anime, you've probably seen everything done here much better somewhere else. However, fighting and the build-up to the fighting isn't the only part of the show. The bulk of the actual episodes tends to be jokes in a much more slice-of-life style show. These are the show's strongest parts, as they're consistently funny. The show makes great use of faces, making them cartoonish, hilarious and overly dramatic, and the show really gets into its stride when characters start to bounce off each other. So far I've been pretty harsh towards this show, and I'd like to reinforce that I think this show is average, not outright bad. There's actually a lot of stuff this show does that I really like, and to finish off this video, I'm going to talk about the good stuff for a change. There's 2 distinctive worlds in this anime, and they've went to the effort of drawing both in 2 completely different drawing styles, both of excellent quality. The fantasy world Satan comes from is drawn with thick, heavy shadows and dull tones, everything is slightly rougher and definitely an awful lot more serious. Our world on the other hand is bright, cheerfully drawn in a typical slice of life style with vibrant lighting and colours. What's even better about this is how these contrasting styles are incorporated into the story, and how it subverts the typical fantasy world versus real world tropes we tend to see. Instead of a normal boy bored with his life at his shitty part-time job at McDonald's getting whisked away to a much happier life of adventure and excitement in another world, we get a terrible demon in a fantasy world whisked away to a part-time job at McDonald's, and he prefers it. The show consistently shows how generally shitty the fantasy world is, and how amazing the real world is in contrast, even if you work at McDonald's. It's also surprising that it never feels the audience is dumb enough to not get that, and it doesn't outright spell this out with some exposition. Of course, this could mean the authors did this by mistake, but regardless, it's still there and still pretty clever. I still feel that this show has one of the stronger first episodes I've seen in a while. It presents an interesting premise that seems to subvert the typical slice-of-life comedy norms, all alongside an intriguing background with this fantasy world it sets up. It's beautifully drawn, it's clever, it's funny, and it promises a lot more than it actually delivers upon, sadly. But regardless, it's very well made, and it's the best the show has to offer. I'm sure you're sick of me repeating this, so I'll keep this short, but the comedy is just generally good, and luckily it takes up the bulk of the episodes too. If they had just stuck to the comedy, then the show would have been a lot stronger than it actually is.